Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Kickstarter Weekly. And in these videos, I talk about crowdfunding campaigns that are going to complete their funding in the coming week. I handpick the games and the campaigns that I think are the cream of the crop, and I try to cut through the glut for everybody else out there so that you don't need to spend as much time looking through Kickstarter and trying to find the best games. Now, I do also run a website called thinkoutside-the-board.com. You can head over to there, and I do daily posts there talking about the games that launched the previous day. So if ever a day goes by and there's no post, it's because there weren't any games that I thought merited being included. Most Kickstarter campaigns launch on Tuesdays, so the biggest post that I do every week tends to be the one that comes out on Wednesdays. And that's kind of one side of the equation. The other side are these videos in which I talk about the campaigns that are actually completing their funding in the next week. So these are kind of like your last chance to remind yourself of games that aren't going to be up much longer. And if it's something that you might want, you have a little time left to go back it before the campaign's going to conclude. Now, I have 3 campaigns to share with you today. 2 of them are on Kickstarter. One is on Gamefound. The one on Gamefound is Bloc by Bloc Uprising. The other 2 are Trekking Through History and Deep Rock Galactic. But I do more than just talk about those campaigns in these videos. I also talk about games that I've played, as well as games that I've personally backed from the previous week, and games that I've acquired into my collection. So before I start talking about those 3 crowdfunding campaigns, I'm first going to talk to you about the 5 games that I played this period. So the first game on this list is Clinic Deluxe Edition, and this is a heavy game, a heavy Euro. It's basically a hospital simulator. It's designed by Alban Viard, who is a French mathematician, and the art on this is by Ian O'Toole, who's also done all of the art for the Vital Lacerda big box games. I really like Ian O'Toole. He's one of my favorite board game artists in the business. And so that's certainly something that drew me to this game, as well as the fact that it is a very heavy Euro. Probably sits up right there with a lot of the Lacerda games in terms of complexity and kind of the way that it's designed. There are a couple odd, fiddly things about Clinic. One of them is that every time you get a new person into your hospital, whether it's a doctor, a nurse, an orderly, a patient, any kind of human being, they come with a car. And you need to find space on your hospital board for all of these cars. There's also a mechanic that has to do with movement. So when you get new patients or new doctors, you're going to place them on an entrance tile, maybe a helipad outside of the hospital. And then there is a phase where you do all of the movement to get all of these various patients and doctors to the rooms where they need to go. I think both of those mechanics are maybe not that essential. It seems a little odd to me to have this basically a hospital simulator where part of it is dealing with parking lots and movement within the hospital. Definitely parking in hospitals feels like an American problem. Maybe they have big problems with it in France as well. So it's not necessarily out of place. I just think it's this kind of fiddly mechanic that doesn't necessarily need to be there. But it is something that as you're designing your hospital and building rooms and bringing people in, you are going to need to take that into account. They do also let you build little kind of parking spaces, parking lots. That helps to some degree. And in fact, in the game that I played last week, I don't think I ever really had to worry about trying to fit in the cars, but it could potentially become a problem. And I just don't know if it's really needed in this hospital game. Now, I played the base game. I also have the extension, which has, I think, 13 different smaller modular expansions. Since then, they've done more Kickstarters. They now have a second extension, third extension, and fourth extension, and all of those have more modular expansions. So there is a lot of room in this game for variability and just a long shelf life with all of these many things that you can mix and match and throw into the game. Now, what you're trying to do in Clinic's Deluxe Edition is get various patients in, and they can range between 4 different kinds of color as they get worse. So the red cube is critical. If you don't heal a red patient, they will die at the end of that round. But they come in sometimes much lower, and if you sort of neglect them while you're in your hospital, they'll get worse and worse. That's not always a bad thing, because when you heal patients that are really far gone, you score a lot more money. There's a lot of things happening in Clinic Deluxe Edition, including the map that you build your hotel on. You can build multiple floors, but there are many construction rules, and oftentimes you can't build the same type of room on top of the room on the floor above it. So there is a lot of sort of architectural juggling going on, and there's a puzzle definitely in terms of the three-dimensional design of the hospital, as well as all of these sort of heavy Euro economics. So I really enjoyed the game a lot. I don't think it's maybe quite as good as a Lacerda. There are a lot of fiddly things in the game, and I love complexity. I love complex games. But fiddliness, I don't think always has to be there. I think one of the main challenges that if I was a heavy designer, I would want to figure out how to make those games as complex as possible without kind of all of the fiddliness. And so those are the games that I tend to try to shoot for. So Clinic is definitely on the fiddlier side, but it's still a really good game, and I still really enjoyed it. And it's something that I plan on keeping in my collection for a while. I definitely need to play it many more times, play the various modular expansions, and see how I feel about it as I get deeper into the extra content. And there's a lot of extra content for this game. But I would give this one a solid recommend to anyone who likes heavy Euros, Vital Lacerdas, games like that. So I'm going to rate this one an 8.0 for now. I sort of expected to rate it higher. And games like this, I tend to really love. It's not uncommon for me to rate games like this a 9, and I definitely feel that I need to play it more. I want to play the modular expansions, see how I like them, see what kind of variability they give to the game, just in terms of the play sessions themselves, as well as what kind of life they extend the game to having with all of that variability. And I think if all of that stuff really clicks with me and I like it, it'll probably increase the score of the game, and I may eventually rate Clinic in the 9s. The reason that it's down at an 8 for me right now is the fiddliness. There is a lot of kind of fiddliness in the game, a lot of moving parts. It's just that there's a lot of extra kind of white noise mechanically in the game and on the game board. So that dings it down for me, for now, from a 9 type rating to an 8.0. So until I play it more, until I play more of the modular expansions, I'll be rating this one an 8.0. I also played Glass Road this week. This is a Uwe Rosenberg game. It's been out of print for a while. It's a lighter game of his, but it came back into print because Capstone Games did a recent printing. Now, I like Capstone Games a lot. In fact, they are my current favorite retail publisher. They are just producing everything on such a high quality level in terms of production for retail games. They're not necessarily doing Kickstarter versions in retail games, but their games are really well made and very solid, just across the board. But on top of that, they are making games that are so good almost across the line. So if Capstone Games is publishing something, it's almost just out of the gate enough for me to blind buy it. But certainly with this one, with Glass Road, which is a Uwe Rosenberg game, a designer that I really like, and it's a new printing of a game that has kind of been out of print and hard to find for a while. So this was my opportunity to be able to finally add that game to my collection and be able to play it. Here's what I found. This is one of the lighter Uwe Rosenberg games, and unless you're with players who have AP or are kind of overthinking things, it can play fairly quickly as well. It's essentially a resource management game, and there are these resource management wheels in the game that are kind of unique. So you've got one for glass and one for brick, and they're using those two industries because in this time period in, I think it was Bavaria, they would have all of these brick making facilities and glass making facilities along the road, almost just kind of abandoned. And so that is what Uwe Rosenberg used to theme this game. Now, each wheel is going to have some components in it. It's things that you'll need to make glass or to make bricks. And the way the wheel is designed, it's got segments, it's segmented. You're going to have starting positions for all these various resources. Now, as you get more and more resources, so you kind of move your little trackers up, whenever you have at least one resource of anything, meaning you're going to have sort of an empty segment on your wheel, the wheel itself will move, and it will essentially use one of everything to create one brick, or if you're on the other wheel, to create one glass. So you're constantly trying to get more resources, but then as you get resources in each wheel, they will automatically make bricks or make glass. And when they do that, they will reduce your materials by one of each kind. It's a very interesting mechanic, and the interplay of the way that those wheels work is really at the heart of the game. And then you'll be using those resources to build production buildings. Now, the other half of this game, mechanically, is the card system. So players will start with 15 cards. They'll have the same 15 cards. And at the start of every round, there's 3 rounds, they'll look at their 15 cards and they'll pick 5 to use in that round. And then as they're taking turns, as players are taking turns and kind of going around, if anyone plays a card that someone else also chose, those players will announce it and they'll play the card to the side of their board. And then all players will get one of the 2 actions on those cards. If you've selected a card to play that nobody else has selected for that round, you will get to take both actions on that card. So players are playing an interesting game, trying to either pick cards that they think the other players won't pick so that they'll be able to do more actions, or possibly playing cards that they think that other players might be playing to limit the number of actions that the other players can do. However, they'll be limiting themselves as well by that action. So there are some interesting choices to be made in this game, and mechanically it feels a little bit different than other games with that interplay, both with the wheels and that card system. And I like both of those things. I also like the fact that the game probably can be taught in about 5 to 10 minutes. It's a quick teach, and if you have players who play fairly quickly playing it, I think there's no reason that, let's say, a 2-player game with the teach couldn't get played in an hour and a half tops. A little bit more for multiple player counts. But the big thing, I think the big decision space in the game is going to be choosing which 5 cards to use every round, and players will be doing that simultaneously, which means that multiplayer games, the more players you have, shouldn't really take that much more time. Now, this isn't my favorite economic game of all time. It's not even my favorite Uwe Rosenberg game. I think the fact that it is mechanically a little bit on the simple side, and it's a shorter game, maybe knocks it down a little bit for me. On the other hand, I really like the fact that this is a game that I can teach quickly. It does have really good decisions, and while it feels kind of like a medium-light game, those decisions are good enough to be in, say, a medium-heavy game. So it's got solid decisions, but it plays fairly smoothly and quickly. And I think for that reason, it's a really, really good game to have in your collection, because it's one of those games, if you still want to have kind of a medium-heavy Euro experience, and you're running out of time in game night, and you only have an hour and a half left, you're still going to be able to get this game played and have a really good gaming experience with it in a shorter amount of time compared to a lot of other games of this type. Now, the other cool thing about the new version, the Capstone, I believe it's the 3rd edition, is that they've included a lot of the other promos that were kind of put out over time. They've collected the previously published material. It's not a lot, it's not huge expansions or anything, so it's not anything that would be borderline a big box. It's not a big box edition. But it does have the smaller little modular expansions or promos that came out previously. So this version will get you everything, and there is some room to kind of play around and try out some different things, but it's not a big box of a game with like tons of expansions. It's just all the content for the game that's been produced over the years. We also played Godspeed, which is a game that I backed on Kickstarter. It was published by Pandasaurus Games, and thematically, I thought it was kind of interesting. It takes place in the 60s, and there are all these countries that have aerospace programs, and they find a planet light years away. They create technology to send astronauts through a portal on a one-way trip. And then when they get there to this other planet, they find that all of these other countries have sent other colonization teams as well. So there's a competition on this planet for resources and building things. And it's nothing that different from what we've seen before. You're doing things like building a few production buildings. You'll get increased resources in your income each round the more you do that. You're going to build 4 different colored cards into a tableau. And as you build various combinations of cards in that tableau, you may also earn yourself some milestones, which come with these little plastic miniatures that'll score 4 victory points at the end of the game. You'll also be going up 4 different tracks as you're doing various actions. And then at the end of the game, placement on those tracks will score, I believe it's 8, 4, and 2 victory points for first, second, and third place. What makes the game special, as far as I'm concerned, is some of the specifics about how they use the kinds of mechanics in this game. So it's worker placement, but at the start of every round, there's going to be a high council phase. Every player is going to have 5 workers, the same 5 workers, but those workers are going to have different values between them. They're randomized for the workers for every country. So one player's ambassador might have a different score on it as another player's ambassador. So in the beginning of a round, you'll do this high council phase, and there'll be one of those units that players all need to contribute if they want to get a joint reward. Now, any player that doesn't contribute will get a penalty. So if you contribute that sort of worker type, you won't get the penalty. And if everybody does it, then in addition to not getting the penalty, everyone will also get a reward. So it's a little bit of a king's dilemma situation there. But the main decision choice is, do I not want to have this worker for the rest of the round? Depending on what you had planned, you might need that worker for later in the round, because in the sort of third part of the round, you'll be taking worker placement actions, and each worker type can go to certain parts of the board. So there are specific places that only one type of unit can go to. So in the beginning, when you're doing that high council phase, you're also looking ahead and you're thinking, can I afford to lose this worker type? After you decide whether or not to do that and spend that worker or take that penalty, you'll then go to a bidding phase where players will take their remaining units as well as any money or wild resources that they have, and they'll put them out and they'll bid, and then they'll show what they have. And then sort of in bid order, players will take these cards that they were bidding on. So obviously the player with the greatest bid is going to get first choice. There's also a first player marker in there. And normally when you're playing this part of the round, whoever wins the bid, not only will they get first pick, they'll also get to take something at the very end, because there's one more thing in this bidding area than there are players. So the highest bidder will actually get 2 things. They'll get the thing that they want the most, and then they'll get the thing that is left behind that nobody else takes. Once they've done that, they'll go into the worker placement phase where they're going to be taking actions. But remember, you can only go to the same places that match the color of your worker. I think there's some interesting decisions to be made in this space. I backed this on Kickstarter. It delivered at the very beginning of the pandemic. And so my fiance Kristen and I played it at a 2-player count. And I think we both really enjoyed the game, but it doesn't really seem designed for a low player count. It seems like it's going to shine at a higher player count, because that's where that kind of event, the High Council with the King's Dilemma, and the bidding is going to really kind of pop and shine. The more people that you have, the more room there is for craziness and chaos and things happening unexpectedly. So I had a game day this past weekend, and I got together with 3 friends of mine, so there were 4 of us, and I got to play Godspeed at a higher player count than I have in the past. I really enjoyed it. Now, the theme on this one is really unique. The components are really nice. I got the Deluxe all-in on Kickstarter, so I have these satin bags for all of the different countries. I have these nice plastic pieces for all of the components. I believe it's with like a heat transfer images on them. they're just great components, really, really high quality, and it makes playing the game a joy. Even the little milestone miniatures that you take, these plastic pieces, they're just very fun to touch. They kind of appeal to the tactile sense. So the game, the table presence of the game, the way that it looks and the components, everything's really nice. I do wonder, though, over time, because while I do like that High Council, the King's Dilemma, and the bidding phase, the mechanics themselves aren't really anything revolutionary. It's just the kind of whole package. And I think with our game group that we played it with this week, we had a lot of fun. I definitely plan on playing it several more times, but I don't know whether I'll keep it over the long term or not. Just because once you get past some of those things that make it a little bit special, a lot of the other mechanics in the game does feel similar to a lot of other games. So for me, I'm going to rate this one at a 7.5 for the time being. It's a game that I like. I might even suggest this one again. I mean, I definitely will suggest this one again. I'll definitely bring it to meetups. I don't know how long that will last. I may play it half a dozen times and then decide to pack it up, sell it, and move on. But after a few plays now, including a recent 4-player game, I'm still enjoying it. I still would like to play it again and continue to see what the game has to offer. I also played Guildmaster this period, and Guildmaster was interesting. It wasn't a game that I really was that interested in, but it was a game that a friend was bringing to a game day. It reminded me a lot of Lords of Waterdeep. Essentially, players are going to be getting cards, adventurers, and then they'll be sending those adventurers out on contracts. There are a lot of games out there like this. Lords of Waterdeep, I think, is a classic that everybody likes because it's fairly light and simple and almost anyone can pick it up. So it's easy to teach, easy to play, easy to get anyone playing. And then there's Yeto Deluxe Master Set, which is like Lords of Waterdeep on steroids. So for players who kind of like those sorts of mechanics, who think that maybe Lords of Waterdeep is a little bit too light for them, they can go and play Yeto and get a more complex game with more things that you can add into it. There are some additions and modular things you can add into Yeto, especially with the Deluxe Master Set that was on Kickstarter a couple of years ago. So this game is kind of in that vein, where you're going to be recruiting adventurers and sending them out on tasks. There's also a space that you can go to try to build some buildings. Now, what makes Guildmaster unique is that there's negotiation in the game and bidding. So when players go to do anything, if someone else is trying to do the same thing that they're going to do, which players plan out ahead of time at the beginning of a round, behind a player screen. So they've kind of decided the things that they're going to want to do and in what order. And then everyone reveals, and if players are trying to do the same thing at the same time, they're going to have to roll off for it, essentially. And one player will win, they'll get to do the thing. The other player will lose. They'll have to do kind of a lame secondary action. And then in cases where you picked a location to go to as maybe like your third thing, if someone else had picked that as their first or second action, you're just crap out of luck. You won't get to go there and do that. You're just going to have to do the side thing. So I don't love that. It is a negotiation game. It's got some take that in it. Players are competing for action, so that's a big part of the game. And if you don't like that, this probably isn't the game for you. And I don't really like that. I don't dislike it. I'm fine to play games like that, but it's not something that draws me into a game. I think for some players that would actually push them away. Some players that would draw them in. For me, it's neither. It's just a mechanic that I don't enjoy very much, and it's not something that I'm going to seek out, but it's not going to stop me from playing a game. But for me, once you get past that uniqueness of the negotiation and the bidding kind of mixed into this Lords of Waterdeep-like game, that's it. That's really the uniqueness of it. And I think if you like Lords of Waterdeep, but you want a little bit more head-to-head conflict and competition, this might be a great game for you. Certainly, I think it's fairly light. It's fairly easy to teach. So I don't think that there is kind of a barrier to entry on this game. For me, it's doing things that other games do. And it's adding in mechanics that I don't love. And I don't think it's doing those things necessarily better than those other games. And it just didn't do anything special to make me really care about it. So for me, while Guildmaster is a game I'd play again if someone really wanted to play it, it's not a game I'd ever buy. It's not something I probably would ever ask to play. So it ends up in that 6.5 range, I think, if I were to give it a score, which I'm giving it 6.5. Lastly, I played Stronghold Undead, which had a Kickstarter a year or two ago from Portal Games. This was a new version of Stronghold. It was originally published by Stronghold Games. In fact, I think that company was created to publish Stronghold. It was their flagship title. It's what their company was named after. But it was designed by Ignacy Trebicek, who runs Portal Games. And so this new version was published by them. And I think this is Ignacy kind of taking his game back and publishing it on his own banner. It was out of print. I have a feeling that much like Cole Worley doing a new version of Pax Pamir and then now John Company and doing it under his own company, this was Ignacy's chance to kind of get this game back under his own shingle, Portal Games. So they did a really nice Kickstarter. They had a lot of really blinged out components. There's a big neoprene mat. Stronghold is basically a tower defense game, and it's a head-to-head game between two players. So one player is playing the invaders, the other player is playing the defender of the stronghold. The defender is playing humans, and the invader has masses of undead, vampires, ghosts, and skeletons that they're kind of sending to this castle to onslaught it. Now, the invader will use mana, and they'll get cards in kind of a spell library, and they'll be able to use that mana to create spells, and they'll have all of these units. They're going to get, I think, 14 new units every round, and they'll just be pushing these units onto this castle and using the spells to do different things with the units to attack the castle. Meanwhile, the defending player will be using hourglasses to create various things and trigger various actions. And they'll use that by placing them down on their board, kind of an action selection. And most of the things that they're building, when they place those hourglasses down, they'll stay on the board until the end of the round. So the player playing the defender won't get to keep building the same things over and over. They'll have to wait until the next round to build it again. There are a few exceptions, like upgrading certain units, where once you do that, you immediately pull the little hourglass tokens back so that you can do it again in the same round. But for that defending player, they're going to be using these hourglasses and doing their best with all of the many things at their disposal to throw at the undead armies and pick them off. Kill some skeletons here, some ghosts there, some vampires there, whittling down their forces so that when they get right up against the castle walls, and they're fighting it out, the defenders will be able to beat them because they will have picked them off enough before they got right up to the castle and they're sitting at the ballasts. So this is not that complex a game to play, but there's a lot of information. There's a lot of stuff. So in teaching it, it's not like it's a complex teach. There's just a lot of information for either player to kind of understand and hold. You have to know, if you're the defending player, there's like 30 different things that you can create. So you need to know what each of those things does and when is the right time to use it. And, kind of situationally. Some of that can be taught. A lot more of it is going to have to be learned over play. Trying things out, seeing what works, what doesn't. When's the right time for something? That means that this is going to be a hard game to get played because it takes a while to teach it, especially early games. They're going to be a few hours each. And this is a game, it's one-on-one, it's strategic. There are a lot of, tools at your disposal, and knowing when to use those tools is key. So everything that you're doing is very situational, and playing the game well, I think to some degree comes with experience. And so it is a game, I think, on some level that requires some investment into it to be able to enjoy it well. And they really went crazy on the Kickstarter. So there are a lot of little mini modular expansions, things that you can throw into it. It's also got a lot of table presence. It looks really cool. And I think ultimately for me, I'm trying to decide whether to keep this one or not. I like the components, I like the table presence, and it's definitely different than anything else out there. And I think if you have a couple people who like this kind of game and are going to be playing it a lot, there's a lot of meat on that bone. But it's not something that you're going to be able to easily teach to somebody whenever you want to. It's going to be a little bit of a process and a little bit of a commitment. And then on the other side of that, I look at kind of what the game does, because it is this kind of tug of war, back and forth, just kind of like the dynamic of the struggle, and the invader is throwing everything they can at this castle and trying to find places to poke holes through the armor and break through the castle walls. So ultimately, I also wonder, while there is all of this variability in the game and variety and ways of doing things, ultimately, does that just cover up the fact that you're just playing this game of strength, right? Certain units have one strength, other units have other strengths. You're going to be using all these various things to try to pick off the invaders as they're coming to the castle, but then once they get there, at any kind of ballast, at any part of the castle wall, there's going to be this little struggle there. And if the defender loses that struggle, and all of their units are killed, and the defender still has at least 1 point left beyond what they need to kill those units, the game is over, and the invader wins. For the defender to win, they have to make it through 8 rounds and just keep the invaders from penetrating through that castle. So I really like the game. I like the look of it. I like how different it is from a lot of other things out there. But I do wonder if, because on one hand, there's just so much information to learn and there's so much variability, and it's going to take playing the game a while to have a handle on all of that. And then contrary to that is the fact that once you kind of see past all of that, the gameplay itself is kind of simple. You're just trying to break through the castle or stop the other player from breaking through the castle. So I don't know long term if the game is going to be compelling enough to keep around, knowing that it's going to be hard to teach people, and then once people get a really good handle on it, how good is the game in that situation? Is much of the game really just a contest of who knows all of the mechanics and the moving pieces better, and who can utilize them without making a mistake? So it's something that I need to think about. I do want to play the game again. I do enjoy it for many reasons. So I guess ultimately I just need to decide whether it's worth having this game that is unique, is different, has great table presence, has a lot of information though and a lot of fiddliness into it. On the one hand, it's got this kind of barrier to entry to be able to play it. And then I think it probably does reward players who know the game better and know all the moving pieces. And then the question is, once you're on the other side of that, how good is the game? Or is it just a case of, I know this game better than you. I knew what to do in the various situations because I know the components better. And so you made a mistake and I didn't. And so I won. If it is that, if it's going to be that hard to kind of teach people and get to the table, and then the kind of returns on it are decreasing the more and more you play it, I probably eventually will move it out of my collection. But I would like to introduce it to a few more people and play it a few more times, have kind of more experiences with it across the spectrum, playing with people who like different kinds of games, and ultimately seeing how the game lands with different people that I know. But I suspect that it'll probably be a game that I sell eventually. The question is, how long do I keep it around to get my money's worth out of it, or get the play value out of it that I think that it might have? Now, because of that, it is a game that I want to play again. It is a game that I look forward to playing again, and strategically and tactically, I like some of the choices in the game. But I ultimately wonder how versatile the appeal is of the game and how long its legs are. So I think for all those reasons, I'm rating it a 7.0 for now. I think if I play it more and my opinion of it increases, it could eventually land maybe an 8.5. It's possible it could go down lower than a 7, but I think that if my opinion starts to go south and my score starts to decrease, that's probably the point that I will just decide to sell the game. So those are the 5 games that I played this week. Scores are an 8.0, a 7.5, a 6.5, a 7.5, and a 7.0. And from there, we are now going to move forward and talk about the 3 crowdfunding campaigns that are concluding their funding this week. Now, a quick note on this. If any of these campaigns that I talk about appeal to you, you can go down into the description section, click on the name of the game, and it will take you over to that crowdfunding campaign. You can learn more about the campaign over there and back it if it's something that you decide you want to do. So the first game on my list this week is called Trekking Through History. They had a minimum required funding goal of $20,000. They're currently at $239,000, which is about 12 times that minimum required funding goal. Trekking Through History is going to complete its funding on Monday, February 28th. This is a game for 2 to 4 players. It plays in about 30 to 60 minutes. Complexity on Trekking Through History is light, and we're going to set the risk associated with this campaign at medium-high. Now, this is an open drafting and set collection game. It was first published back in 2014 under the name Trekking the National Parks. And a few years later, another game came out called Parks, which looked very similar. And I played Parks. I like it a lot. It had a very, very nice set of components, and it did a couple of Kickstarter campaigns, and it's a good game. But if you're wondering what Trekking Through History is like, it is a lot like Parks. Like I said, though, Trekking was actually made first. So Trekking the National Parks, 2014, then the game Parks came out, which is unrelated, in 2019, and then in 2020, a new version of Trekking came out called Trekking the World. So it exchanged nature and national parks for a global setting, and now with this latest version, they're going through history. The designer here is Charlie Bink, and the trekking games are his big thing. That's basically what he's done. So he did Trekking the National Parks, Trekking the National Parks 2nd Edition, and Trekking the World. The artist on this project, Eric Hibbler, has previously worked on Junk Orbit, Terror Below, and Yukon Airways. The publisher here is Underdog Games, which is Charlie Bink's company, and they have published such games as Coconuts, Trekking the National Parks 2nd Edition, and Trekking the World. Now, they make it very easy. There's only one pledge level. It is $50. It's Trekking Through History. If you want the game, pledge that pledge level. That's it. If you want to pick up either of the 2 previous games, Trekking the National Parks, which is now in that 2nd edition, the 2nd printing, or Trekking the World, you can get either of those games in the Pledge Manager as an add-on for $40. And there's one other item that's available as an add-on. For $5, you can get a set of 4 digital prints, art from the game. If you're living in the continental United States, there's also no shipping to be paid for this. It's free shipping. They've already kind of factored that into the price. So your $50 pledge is complete. You won't have to pay anything more. And finally, Underdog Games is planning on delivering Trekking Through History in October of 2022. For the second game on this list, Bloc by Bloc Uprising, we're going to travel over to Gamefound. Now, Bloc by Bloc Uprising had a minimum required funding goal of $40,000. They're currently at $113,000, which is about 3 times that minimum required funding goal. This one's going to complete its funding on Thursday, March 3rd. It plays 1 to 4 players in about 1 to 2 hours. Complexity on Bloc by Bloc Uprising is medium heavy, and we're going to set the risk associated with this campaign at medium high. Now, this is a cooperative or semi-cooperative game, depending on how you're playing it, and players are going to take on the roles of students, prisoners, workers, or neighbors, and they're going to be fighting against the police. So this game is all about resistance in police states, which unfortunately is becoming more prevalent in many parts of the world right now. The cool thing, though, that this game does is it's very abstracted. So you're kind of playing in this world of these block creatures, and they're going to be doing things. They're going to be taking resistance and doing things. But that level of abstraction in the game, I think, makes the game a little less overtly political, so the players can concentrate on the mechanics and kind of thematically what's happening without being kind of overwhelmed about how it compares to real-world scenarios. However, I think playing this game may actually give players some wisdom into some of those dynamics, but it doesn't feel preachy or even teachy. It's just trying to create a good game, and it's using these situations to create the mechanics in the game. Now, there are two different designers on this game. Greg Loring Albright previously worked on Leviathan, and T.L. Simons previously worked on a game called Bloc by Bloc, the Insurrection game, which is really an earlier version of this. So that game was published in 2016, then they did a second version of it in 2018, and now they're coming back with what's essentially a third edition, but they've changed it around, they've kind of redesigned it. There's also nicer components. It's just an all-around better production, better game that they've taken the previous two games, what they've learned on that, to make it even better. T.L. Simons also happens to be the artist on this game, and games that he's previously worked on as an artist include Bloc by Bloc, the Insurrection game, Dungeon Decorators, and Merchants of Magic, a set-a-watch game. And Out of Order Games is publishing Bloc by Bloc, Uprising, and previously they published Bloc by Bloc, the Insurrection game. We have another pair of very simple pledges for this one. So for $16, which is called Upgrade to Rising, you can get an upgrade pack that will convert either one of your first or second editions of the game into the new, better, improved third edition of the game. And if you're new to this, if you're just trying to pledge a copy of this game, then the pledge that you want is $44. It's called Bloc by Bloc Uprising, and that will get you the game. That is really the only pledge level that you need to worry about if you're just pledging the game, the full game. It's either that or the upgrade pack. Now, the shipping range for continental US shipping is listed at $11 to $12, which means if you get the upgrade pack, you're probably going to pay $11 in shipping, and if you're getting the game, you're probably paying $12 in shipping. And Out of Order Games is planning on delivering Bloc by Bloc Uprising in November of 2022. The last game on our list is called Deep Rock Galactic, and this one's back on Kickstarter. Now, they had a minimum required funding goal of $225,000 for this game. They're currently at $2.3 million, which is just about 10 times that minimum required funding goal. Deep Rock Galactic is also going to complete its funding on Thursday, March 3rd. This is a game for 1 to 4 players. It's going to play in about 1 to 2.5 hours. Complexity on the game is medium light, and we're going to set the risk associated with this campaign at high. And there are several reasons for that. So this is essentially a cooperative game. It's a dungeon crawler. It's also based on a video game IP called Deep Rock Galactic. If you don't know that game, it's out right now on Xbox and on PC. The Xbox, I think, on Metacritic has a rating of 8.3, and the PC version, I believe, has a rating at Metacritic of 8.5. And it is a dungeon crawler. What makes it a little bit different is that it has players playing dwarves. They're also miners, so they're going to be fighting these monsters, and they're going to be mining for rare minerals and dungeon crawling. The game is designed by Ole Steines, who previously designed Champions of Midgard, Police Precinct, and Spurs, A Tale in the Old West, and it has 2 artists on it. This appears to be Rasmus Berggreen's first published game, and Jonas Springborg, who previously has worked on Dead Zone, Kings of War, and Star Wars Outer Rim. And it's being published by Mood Publishing, who published a game called Rise of the Necromancers. Now, look, I am a little worried about this game. I know it's got some interest. It's already got $2.3 million pledged to it. But in my opinion, as someone who looks at these campaigns a lot every day, most campaigns, the information that they've included on their page, just kind of in their campaign, is minimal. It's less than I think I have faith in. And it feels to me like they're taking this, fairly recent and well-liked video game IP to try to sell this game. So I do feel like there's a little bit more risk involved, and part of that comes from the fact that they're not really sharing a lot of the game, of the rule books, of things like that. So we don't really know all of the mechanics, how it works. You can make guesses based on what you like about the video game and hope that the video game is so good that the transfer over to a board game will be easy, but there's a lot of bad video game, board game adaptations out there. Most of them. It's usually rare for someone to pull it off well. So the fact that there isn't the kind of information that I'd really like to see on the campaign gives me pause. It'd be cool if it's a really good game, and I think partly because it's selling so much right now, so many people have pledged it, there's so much money committed to it, I feel the need to cover it and talk about it. But I do want to give anyone who's thinking about pledging it, especially if you love the video game, a little bit of warning. I mean, just take a look at this campaign, see this campaign for what it is, see this project for what it is, and try to let go of your feelings and your love for the video game version, because you don't want to back this game because you like something else and then end up with a not great game. So we've got 4 different pledge levels for this one. The first is $74. It's the standard edition. It's going to get you the basic version of the game. The main thing in this standard edition that makes it different is you're going to have minis, even in the standard edition, for the characters that you're playing. But the creatures that you'll be fighting in the standard edition, you're getting standees. For $124, you can pledge the Deluxe edition, and that will swap out those standees and give you miniatures instead. The race in the game is called Glyphids, and you'll be getting 33 miniatures with the Deluxe version of the game. Now for $173, you can pledge the Collector's Edition, and that is going to add a few things in that are gameplay related and a few things in that are not. So you'll get a beer mug event marker, you will get an expansion called Goo From Above, also a neoprene board mat and card sleeves. And then the sort of non-gameplay related stuff includes STL files for the miniatures. You'll have those for the future. You can always print them out, as well as 4 art prints, and then a large mouse mat, just something that you can use with your computer. Now there's a second Collector's Edition pledge. It's also $173. It's called Collector's Edition B. And what that is going to do is remove the 4 art prints and the mouse pad from the order. So it'll be everything that's in that first Collector's Edition minus those 2 things, and then in place of them, you'll be getting 113 plastic tokens. These are for various components in the game that are going to be cardboard otherwise. So you have your choice between the 2 Collector's Editions. You can either pledge the second one, doesn't have the art prints, doesn't have the mouse pad, but it has these plastic tokens, or you can pledge the first one with the mouse pad and the art prints, but no plastic tokens. It doesn't appear that you'll be able to add those things on in the pledge manager, but you never know. They might be there. They're just not being marketed as being able to be added on. Continental US shipping for this game is a range of $15 to $22. So you'd be paying somewhere in there depending on what you pledge. And Mood Publishing is planning on delivering Deep Rock Galactic in December of 2022. Now moving forward, I'd like to talk about the game that I pledged from last week's video. So in last week's video, I covered 8 different games. There were different games that I considered pledging at different times on that list. I actually did back Rolling Heights initially, and the more I looked at the gameplay, the kind of rolling meeples mechanic, I just didn't love it. I wasn't in love with it. I didn't really think it was something that was going to click with me. Now I have some other John D. Clare games, and this is definitely something I want to play, and I mean, who knows, maybe I'll really, really like it. But I think for me, I know other friends who are pledging it, so I'm just going to play their copies. I don't feel right now that it is a game that I need to have in my collection or that I wanted to back. So I actually did pledge it, and then I canceled my pledge. I also considered backing the Unfair expansion and Evolution New World. Evolution is just a game that's been around since I started the hobby. There's been a couple different versions of it. I started to play one version once, but we didn't actually finish it. I've never played a full game of any of the Evolutions. So I was looking possibly about backing this. I gave it a look. I think ultimately it just felt a little too similar to a lot of other games that are out there. You know, it might be good, but it's doing a lot of the same things. And, the design of it, the package, just, I think it's a good package if you're trying to get, a game on the cheap. It was a smaller version of a game with less component-wise. It wasn't a huge Kickstarter. So I eventually decided that it just wasn't a game for me. I was also looking at the campaign for Earth, which is up right now. That one's actually going to complete the following week, and I likely will be talking about it in a later Kickstarter weekly. But those games seem to have a lot in common. So I was going back and forth trying to decide if I wanted to back one or the other. And right now, I don't know for sure. I could still end up backing Earth, but I think I'm not going to back either. I just think that they're too kind of similar to everything that's out there and not enough to really stand out in my collection. They're both games I'd like to play at some point. I just don't think that I needed to add them to my collection. And then as far as Unfair goes, that's just another game that I think a lot of families really enjoy. It's kind of a medium-heavy complexity, but it's another one of these games that's just kind of building stuff up in set collection. There's a million games out there like that. What makes Unfair special is the theme park theme behind it, and that's pretty cool. I'd like to play it. I know a friend who has it and backed the latest campaign, so I thought that's great. I'll just be able to play it that way, maybe a few times with him. But again, it's sitting in this space of kind of a medium light to medium heavy game. There's so many good games in that space. I need something to set those games apart from one another for me to add something new into my collection. With a lot of those games like that, I'm actually trying to remove games. I already have enough games like that, too many. So I'm trying to move games out. So if I'm adding in a new game like that, it has to have something different or something special. And Unfair, I don't think that it really does. Beyond the theme, I think a lot of families will like the game because it has kind of a wide appeal and it has a fun theme. But I just need something more if I'm going to be adding more games like this into my collection. So ultimately it was a pass for me. Which means the one game that I did back from last week was Astro Knights. Now that is the new deck builder from the team that does Aeon's End. And Aeon's End is one of my favorite 2 deck builders of all time. Aeon's End and Thunderstone Quest. So I was curious about this campaign because what they're doing is they're redesigning the game. They're setting it in, it's kind of space themed, which is different. You know, the Aeon's End is about mages battling and it's fantasy themed. So this game is a theme switch. I don't know mechanically how different it's going to be. I mean, it's kind of the same game. They may change some things mechanically, but it's based in Aeon's End. So I think if you have everything for Aeon's End, you don't necessarily need Astro Knights. It could be a great jumping on point for somebody who's heard about Aeon's End, especially if they prefer, you know, a space theme to a fantasy theme. But I think for someone like me who really, really likes Aeon's End, there's still room to get another game that's similar and tweaked and different. So hopefully I'll feel that way when it comes, you know, that there's enough different things in it to also make it worthwhile and it's not just a reskin. But if I have to sell it because it's so similar, then that's not that big a deal. I'm happy to give a new iteration by that team a chance. That's how good Aeon's End is. So that brings us to the final section of this video, which is the acquired games. Games I have added into my collection since the previous video. So this is either games that I buy at retail or Kickstarters that deliver. And I think I have a combination of games for this video. First up is Ark Nova, which is a tile placement game where players are creating their own zoo. And it's a heavy Euro. It's just recently published. It's already got a rating of 8.7 on Board Game Geek. People are really loving this game, and it's very much the kind of game that I really like. So I pre-ordered it through Capstone Games, and I'm very excited to get it to the table. Before I do that, I need to finish up a video series that I'm currently working on, which I'll talk about at the very end of the video very quickly. But I need to kind of get that work done, I think, before I play new games that just published in 2022. But I'm very much looking forward to it. It's published by Capstone Games, which I already mentioned earlier in this video is my favorite retail publisher out there. They're just doing such good things, making such good games, and publishing them with a very high production quality behind them. So I'm very excited to get to Ark Nova, and I'm hoping to do that sooner rather than later. Now, also in that order, because it was directly through the Capstone Games website, I got the Cooper Island Skilled Workers mini expansion. I had ordered Cooper Island from Capstone a couple months ago, I think. I haven't had a chance to get it to the table yet, but this little kind of mini expansion brings asymmetric powers into the game, and that's always something that I love. So since I was getting Ark Nova, I decided to add the Cooper Island Skilled Workers mini expansion onto my order as well. Now, the Kickstarter game that I received this period is the Isle of Cats Kittens and Beasts. And for my money, well, I'm already talking about Ark Nova, which is a tile placement game, and I haven't played it yet, so things could change as time goes forward. But for now, my favorite tile placement game is the Isle of Cats, and I have all of the stuff made previously. But they did a new Kickstarter last year. It was for some smaller modular expansions, Kittens and Beasts 2-in-1, as well as some other various upgrades and things. So I went ahead and I backed that along with the big box. In fact, right now, I'm staring at the big box. So I need to take this game along with the Late Arrivals pack, which is on a bookcase down there that you can't see on camera. And I need to take everything out, combine everything, and fit it into the big box, which is sitting on my table right over there. So that needs to happen, and I need to kind of assemble everything. But I love Isle of Cats. It's got two things in it that I really like. One of them is drafting. So you get a certain number of cards, you pick some, you pass them on, they go around the table, you're taking the cards from the next player, picking one of those cards. Anyone who's played basic game of Seven Wonders knows how that kind of draft works. So that's part of the Isle of Cats, and then based on the cards that you end up with, you will be placing tiles into a boat and trying to save cats, get them off this island before this evil character, I think his name is Vesh, shows up. And there are various rules about how you can place cats and how you can score points. And the more you get your cards and draft certain cards, that will get you certain cat tiles and maybe certain scoring opportunities, or it may change certain rules or adjust certain things. So I really like the interplay between those two things in Isle of Cats. I think it's a resounding success and one of the best times that anyone has combined those two mechanics. Bunny Kingdom is something a little bit similar, where you've got a drafting phase and then you're placing your bunnies out, but that is more about kind of area control and how you're placing things on a map. And I don't like Bunny Kingdom as much. I don't think it's as compelling a game. I really like that second part in Isle of Cats after the drafting, where you're doing the tile placement. To me, that's where it really shines. Whereas the second part of Bunny Kingdom, when you're doing all that placing, it just feels a little humdrum to me. I mean, and there are many other games out there that do, big drafting phase, and then you take those cards into the second part of the game and you use them in the second part of the game. But for my money, Isle of Cats does it as good or better than anybody else that I know about. And it's also my favorite polyomino game. I think if I was just going to be playing a two-player polyomino game, I'd probably do Patchwork. But any other player count, I'd rather play Isle of Cats than just about anything else. I'd rather play it than Cottage Garden or any of the Uwe Rosenberg games. Baron Park is supposed to be another really good tile placement game, but I think I still prefer Isle of Cats. And the third game that I got in that capstone order is Ride the Rails. Now, also back behind me, you can see over here, I have Irish Gauge, which was designed by Amabel Holland, and I don't love Irish Gauge. And the reason why is I really like train games, but Irish Gauge takes the pick up and deliver out. So that game just kind of pairs things back to building train routes and stock trading. And for me, it takes out the most fun part of the game. So this is a game I'm probably going to eventually be selling. Now, Capstone Games publishes this Iron Rail series, and Irish Gauge was the first game in the series. Iberian Gauge, which is also designed by Amabel Holland, is the third game in the series. The middle game in the series is called Ride the Rails, and that is designed by John Borer, who did Railways of the World, and that is a much more straightforward, normal train game. So I think Irish Gauge is probably going to eventually be sold, but I think Ride the Rails may be a keeper. And because it is more of the kind of train game that I like with pick up and deliver, I wanted to get that into my collection and probably to replace that one. Now, when I did that, there are also two map packs, expansions that are available. One is Australia and Canada, which is a really interesting combination of countries. And I'm actually really excited to play train maps in Australia and Canada. Separate games, I think. I believe it's a map, and so there's one country on either side. And then they've made a second map pack, France and Germany. So I did pick up both of those map packs to give Ride the Rails more life. And I think ultimately I'm going to have to decide what to do about my train games. I do own Age of Steam, Railways of the World, and Ride the Rails, as well as a few other games. I know Irish Gauge is going. Maglev Metro is another one, although that has its own thing. It's kind of unique. And that game has some expansions coming out this year, so I think I probably want to hold on to Maglev Metro as well. But I imagine that over time, I won't need Age of Steam and Railways of the World and Ride the Rails. Maybe Ride the Rails will be a keeper because it's a much smaller game. It's much more compact. I think the box for it is like about, this big and maybe like this one. It's smaller, and then the maps are smaller. Whereas Age of Steam and Railways of the World are both enormous, and they have big boxes. So I think that eventually I'll probably get rid of either Railways of the World or Age of Steam. Probably won't keep both because I think they have a lot closer overlap. But Ride the Rails, I think, can probably coexist with either of those games in a collection. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope I had some information here that was valuable to you, whether that's my opinion of games that I've played, the Kickstarter and Gamefound campaigns that are going to be completing this week, or just, games that I got that you may want to see in the future on this channel, as well as games you may eventually want to pick up yourself. I'm also in the middle right now of a video series that covers my 100 most anticipated games of 2022. I've got 2 videos left in that 8-game series. So I will link the first game in the series down below in the description. And if you haven't seen that series, you can check it out. The first video starts the series and I talk about my 10 honorable mentions. In the second and third videos, I talk about my 50 most anticipated expansions and newer versions of games that have already been published in the past. And then beginning with video 4, I do 20 games of video going alphabetically through my 100 most anticipated games of 2022. So I'm hoping to get that series finished this week. I have 2 more videos. I think it's possible to do. We'll see how the week goes and what else is going on during this week. But I'm anticipating and being hopeful that that series will complete this week, and I'll have 2 more videos coming out during the week, and then another Kickstarter weekly at the end of the week. So please don't forget to like and subscribe. You can also hit the alarm bell if you want to know and be notified whenever I publish videos in the future. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you're going to have a great week playing some really good games. I know for me, I think next weekend I'm playing Descent Legends of the Dark, and then that week I have a bunch of other games I know I'll be playing as well, but I'll be talking more about those in future videos, which I hope to see you back here for.